The European training network Diaphora joins 7 research centres in Europe. Philosophy departments at the universities of Barcelona, Stirling, Edinburgh, Stockholm, Munich, Neuchâtel and the Institut Jean Nicot in Paris. Diaphora serves as a joint research and training platform for collaborative research into the nature of philosophical problems and the sources of persistent peer disagreement about their solutions. It's fair to say that, unlike problems in other fields, the problems of philosophy have proved quite resilient. Attempts to give these problems short shrift have notoriously failed. They cannot all be made to disappear by simply purging our thought of certain confusions. Nor do they all mature into questions ultimately to be addressed by the other sciences. One would expect that such peer disagreement mandates suspension of judgment. What we find instead is that professional philosophers tend to endorse and systematically defend certain solutions rather than others. These features of philosophical practice call for a proper diagnosis. Diaphora works towards this goal on the basis of a better understanding of what makes philosophical problems so hard. It aims to do so by working through a number of paradigmatically resilient philosophical problems, including those that concern the preconditions of reasoned debate itself.
My project is about intuitions. We all have intuitions from time to time. In fact, we can have intuitions about all kinds of things. For example, about the truth of statements such as torturing kittens for fun is wrong. In my PhD project, I try to understand what kind of mental states are intuitions. Are they rather on the perceptual, the cognitive, or the affective side of things? So, are they similar to perceptual experiences? Are they similar to thoughts and beliefs, or are they rather similar to emotions and feelings?
In my PhD project, I'm interested in debates about the laws of nature. In our everyday life, commonly we think of the laws of nature as, in some sense, governing the behavior of objects. So for instance, if I let a pencil drop, we think of the laws of gravitation as somehow forcing the pencil to fall to the earth. But on closer examination, it's quite puzzling what it could amount to. So while some philosophers try to devise other ways in which we might understand the laws of nature as governing the behavior of objects, others give up that common understanding. And instead they hold that the laws of nature are just certain kinds of generalizations that, are particularly good at capturing the regularities we find in nature. In my project, I am in particular interested in the methodology of that debate, that is in how people argue for their claims and what are the best methods for investigating these kinds of questions.
I just started an internship for Search for Common Ground in Brussels. It's great to have an opportunity to learn how the NGOs in this field work and how they resolve conflicts in the real world. From my previous studies, I've retained an interest in game theory, and it's interesting to see how the theory clashes with how things work in the real world. It's a great privilege to be able to get experience in this field.
A basic intuition we have regarding the nature of time is that there is a difference between the future and the past. The past is closed once and for all, while the future is open and replete with many possibilities. We decide, we hope, we gamble, we regret, we remember, we forgive. All these common attitudes, and there are many more, presuppose an open future and a closed past. However, a number of arguments, mainly taken from contemporary physics, have been put forward to show that this asymmetry between the future and the past is, in fact, illusory. So, in my 3-year research project, I tried to conceptually improve the way we, as non-physicists, think about the nature of time in order to reconcile our common sense with the most salient scientific theories.
My project is about how we get from perception to belief. So how we get from things like smelling, seeing, touching and tasting to having a belief about how things are in the world. And the clue normally is in how what we call the content of the perceptual experience gets to what we call the content of a belief. And content simply means like the information it gives us about the world. How does what our experience tells us become what we believe about how things are?
My research project centers around paradoxes of truth. Typically, you would think that a sentence is true if and only if what it says is the case. For example, the sentence "snow is white" is true if and only if snow is white. However, consider a lie sentence, which is a sentence that says about itself that it is not true. If we assume that it's true, well, then what it says must be the case, but this is that it is not true. If we assume that it is not true, again, this is what it says, so it must be true. However, these contradictions are unacceptable in our theories of truth because they would allow us to derive any proposition whatsoever, which is completely unacceptable. So my project basically suggests a way out of paradox by keeping the notion of truth on board, however altering the structure underlying reasoning in order to avoid paradox. So for example, in the case of paradoxes, it may no longer be the case that just because you can infer from A to B and from B to C, you can therefore infer from A to C.
So my investigation is focused on epistemological issues about concepts. So one question I'm concerned with is, what does it take for one to be able to have thoughts involving a certain concept? So it is interesting that people can think and talk about things that they do not fully understand, or even things about which they are grossly mistaken. So for example, everybody thinks and talks about things like megabytes or pixels, or medical conditions like diabetes or arthritis, or even technical things like democracy or parliamentarism, even though almost no one is able to come up with a definition of those things. So it seems that possessing a concept and fully understanding it are really independent things. One of the things I'm trying to do in my research is trying to figure out how those two things interact.
These days, logical reasoning is often combined with other mathematical resources, such as game theory, probability theory, graph theory, and all of them are represented in Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy.
This June, I worked as an intern in the Barcelona-based NGO Diaphora. Diaphora is a foundation and consultancy firm that implements various projects on an international level, focusing on the rule of law, gender equality, or prevention of violence. One of the great things working at Diaphora was that right from the beginning, they involved me in one of their long-standing programs aiming at increasing the level of education in schools in the Euro-Mediterranean region.
In my research project, I focus on the early modern debate over free will and determinism in 18th century England. The early modern period is one of the richest and most interesting for the problem of free will, since the debate starting then to take shape as we know it nowadays. The question of free will, being an unsolved one, represents an instance of a persistent disagreement, and in line with the objectives of Diaphora, my aim is to investigate the sources of such a disagreement.
Another benefit of being a member of European Training Network is being able to spend some time as an intern in a partner organization and gaining some practical work experience.
Many people would agree that we ought to believe things based purely on evidence. However, one insight from recent work in epistemology is that in forming the beliefs that we do based on evidence, we're thereby committed to holding certain presuppositions or assumptions about the nature of the external world and our epistemic relationship to it. For example, in forming an ordinary belief based off perception, I'm thereby committed to presupposing that my perceptual faculties are functioning reliably, or that there is an external world to which I have perceptual access. The challenge is to account for how we can be justified in holding these presuppositions in the absence of evidence for them.
So some interesting questions that arise in the area of self-knowledge are whether our knowledge about ourselves is importantly different from our knowledge about other people, which psychological processes and mechanisms are involved in the acquisition of self-knowledge, and whether we are immune to error when it comes to forming beliefs about our own mental states. My PhD project is about the rationality of emotion, and in particular, it's about their epistemic rationality, or the kind of rationality that's linked to knowledge or understanding. In general, emotions are rational only if they are based in good reasons. So the aim of my project is to investigate the relationship between the rationality of emotions and the rationality of beliefs. And specifically, I want to explore the idea that maybe our reasons for emotions don't need to be quite as strong as our reasons for beliefs do.
Working in this European training network is a unique opportunity for me from different points of view. First, the fact that this network is specifically devoted to studying the topic of disagreement in the public sphere allows me to build bridges between my interests in epistemology and several urgent problems that are affecting our society nowadays. Second, being part of this network also means having lots of opportunities to share thoughts and work with great scholars from all over the world and receive amazing feedback on my project.
There are several ways of evaluating our beliefs. For example, we evaluate beliefs for truth, knowledge, reliability, and also justification. The last of these examples, namely justification, differs from the others insofar as one can have justified beliefs, but without them being true or reliable. Consequently, an important task in philosophy is to give an account of how justification comes apart from these other dimensions of evaluation. My research project is mainly focused on the nature of justification, and in particular what is known as the internalism and externalism debate. In my dissertation, I seek to develop new arguments in favor of an access internalist account of justification, according to which one always has a sort of privileged access to facts about what one has justification to believe.
Being a member of the Diaphora project brings many benefits with it. However, most important to me is the fact that it's a project dedicated to the study of philosophical methodology and thus how to solve philosophical problems.
One thing I like particularly about it is that it makes it really easy to get in contact with a lot of people who work on questions that are related to my topic and to profit from their expertise.
We're working with several people at once, not just with one professor in one university, and that really gives you an advantage nowadays in philosophy. You need to be networking, you need to be integrating. It's not something you can just simply do on your own.
I'm pretty sure that by the end of my PhD, I will have acquired skills and connections that wouldn't have been able to acquire from anywhere else. I'm grateful for that.